Hey everyone, welcome back to Dark Night Scare. Today's episode I am sharing 14 terrifying true stories from the Blue Ridge Parkway. Many people think of the Parkway as only calm drives and breathtaking overlooks, but this might completely change that picture. Before we dive in, make sure to subscribe and don't forget to like and share with your friends. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. Thanks a lot, everyone. Now, let's get into it. I honestly didn't mean to end up alone on the Wren Hollow scenic route past midnight. The whole day was supposed to be uneventful. Just a quick trip to Chapel Hill to help my cousin Margot unpack some boxes, but we lost track of time. It's always like that with her. One minute we were taping up kitchen shelves. The next we were sitting cross-legged on her floor with plates of reheated pasta, debating whether her cat had an eating disorder or just liked the drama. When I finally looked at my phone, it was almost 10s. I didn't feel worried. I was just tired, more annoyed at myself for not getting out earlier. So when my GPS rerouted me onto that long stretch of road, promising it would get me home 20 minutes faster, I didn't think twice. I remembered my Uncle Eli mentioning once that the route felt strange at night. He'd said it in that half-joking tone he used when he wasn't sure if he was kidding, but honestly, I was too exhausted to care. I just wanted to get home, kick off my shoes, and fall into bed. At first, it was nothing special, just darkness, broken up by the occasional reflector post. No other headlights in either direction, no glows of houses tucked into the hills. It felt like the road had been peeled away from the world, just floating out there with me on it. I switched on the radio to fill the quiet, but every station dissolved into a scratchy fuzz that scraped at my nerves. So I shut it off and tried to settle into the silence. About half an hour in, the fuel gauge dipped below a quarter tank. I told myself that was fine. There had to be a gas station eventually. Maybe one of those little 24-hour places with vending, machines and tired clerks who didn't ask questions. But the road just kept climbing, bending into longer, darker stretches where the trees pressed close to the asphalt. Then I passed a small wooden post with a crooked sign nailed to it. Mile 147 painted in cracked white letters. I had no idea where mile 147 even was. I held my phone up toward the windshield, hoping maybe the elevation would coax a signal out of the air. Not even a flicker. That was the first moment I felt the edge of something I didn't want to name. Not fear exactly, more like my body realizing before my brain did that I was very alone out there. About 10 minutes later, I saw a car on the shoulder. It was a red hatchback with hazard lights blinking like they'd been left on too long. The driver's door was open, drifting slowly back and forth in the breeze. I slowed almost on instinct. There was a shape in the passenger seat. Even when my headlights swept over the interior, the person didn't react, didn't move an inch. I rolled my window down halfway and cold air flooded in, sharp and dusty like old leaves. "Hey," I called, trying to keep my voice calm and casual. "Everything okay over there?" "Nothing." I felt this tight, cold line running from my throat down into my stomach. Part of me wanted to pull over, get out, check on them. I think most people would. But another part, something deeper and older, was telling me that stopping was a mistake. I let my foot settle back onto the gas. As I passed the hatchback, I couldn't help looking. The person's face was turned away. Their hands rested in their lap, perfectly still, like they'd been arranged that way. I kept my eyes locked on the rearview mirror. For a second, everything stayed exactly the same. Then, just past the edge of my headlights, I saw movement. Someone stepped out of the trees behind the car. He didn't look up. He walked around the open door with this slow, unbothered pace, climbed into the driver's seat, and shut the door. A second later, the hazard lights stopped blinking. I pressed the accelerator so hard, my thigh cramped. My heart was knocking against, my ribs in this dull, panicked rhythm. Nothing followed me. No headlights in the mirror, no engine noise behind me, just curve after curve of empty road. I kept trying to convince myself there was an explanation. Some harmless reason for the car, for the man in the trees, for all of it. But every version of that story sounded like a lie. The road narrowed as it kept climbing. No more guardrails, just a steep drop beyond the crumbling shoulder. I passed another overlook, marked with a sagging wooden sign that looked ready to collapse. Overlook 4. I almost drove right past it, but when my gas warning light flickered on, it felt like the road itself was forcing me to stop. I knew I couldn't risk running out up there. I pulled into the overlook and cut the engine, though part of me was screaming not to. The gravel lot was bigger than it looked, stretching out into the darkness. Parked at the far end was a black SUV with windows tinted so dark they didn't reflect my headlights at all. I picked a spot as far from it as I could get. My hand hovered over the ignition, the keys cold against my palm. For a few seconds, I just let the engine tick, like I might need to throw it into gear again without warning. I held my phone up, angling it every direction, hoping for even a sliver of signal. Nothing. I turned the engine off, and the quiet came flooding in, too thick to feel natural. I sat there gripping the wheel, staring at the SUV. My skin felt clammy. Every time I blinked, I expected something to move behind those black windows. Nothing did. I tried to tell myself I was being ridiculous. Maybe somebody was resting or they'd fallen asleep. But that didn't explain the man in the trees or the way my whole body felt like it was bracing for something I couldn't see. I glanced down to check my phone again. When I looked back up, something in the SUV shifted, just a small flicker of motion behind the windshield. I didn't see a face. Then came a single heavy thump against the back driver's side window of my car. My throat closed. Another thump, this time closer to my side. I don't even remember grabbing. The keys. My hands were shaking so hard I nearly dropped them between the seats. I jammed them into the ignition, trying to force my breath to come back. The starter groaned and died. When I looked up, he had moved. He was closer now, maybe 20 feet away, standing in the middle of the gravel, still perfectly still. His head was tilted slightly, as if he was listening to something I couldn't hear. I lifted my phone to my ear, pretending I was calling someone. I couldn't even get a single bar out there, but it felt better to act like I had backup. He raised, one hand, palm out, as if he wanted to show me he wasn't holding a weapon. For a second, I almost laughed. It was such a careful, harmless gesture that it made me feel ridiculous for thinking anything was wrong. Then he started moving his lips. It was so slow, deliberate, like he wanted to make sure I could read every word. But the glass was up and all I heard was my own heartbeat. My hand dropped to the horn and I pressed it hard enough. My palms stung. The blast ripped across the clearing and bounced back from the trees. He didn't even twitch. I turned the key again. This time the engine coughed, stuttered, and finally caught. The relief that poured over me was so sharp it made my eyes burn. I shifted into reverse without looking away from him. My foot hovered over the pedal. Then he lifted his other hand. He was holding something small and black, square with a stubby antenna. It looked like an old walkie-talkie. He brought it up to his mouth. His eyes stayed locked on mine. I watched his thumb press the button. There was this burst of static, and then a second voice came through, flat and distorted, but unmistakably human. "It's time." Those words hit me in a way I still don't know how to explain. My whole body went cold like I'd stepped into a freezer. I hit the gas. Gravel spat out from under my tires and pinged off the hatchback. He didn't move aside or try to follow. He just stood there watching me back away. I cranked the wheel and shoved the shifter into drive, slamming the gas pedal. I didn't look back. I drove for what felt like hours, never letting my speedometer dip below 70. The curves kept coming over and over, like the road wasn't planning to ever let me off. When I finally spotted a blue sign with gas prices and an arrow, Lakeview Fuel, open all night, I almost laughed. Or maybe I was about to cry. Hard to tell. I pulled in so fast the tires squealed on the concrete. The overhead lights were too bright, harsh and fluorescent. But I welcomed them. I sat there with the engine running, scanning the road behind, me to be sure nothing had followed. I never called the police. I told myself there was nothing to report, no proof, just a series of moments that added up to something I couldn't explain. I'd finally managed to get 4 days off work in a row, which felt like some minor miracle. So I decided I was going to drive the entire length of the Larkspur Scenic Highway. I'd been meaning to do it for years. Just me, no co-workers, no inbox full of just checking in messages, no one else's schedule. I pictured it as this quiet, easy trip where I could finally breathe without worrying about anyone else. I rented this big SUV because the forecast kept hinting that temperatures might drop below freezing in the higher elevations. My dad had plenty to say about that. He kept pacing around my kitchen, telling me 100 reasons why solo trips were a terrible idea. Eventually, he got me to promise I'd call him every night before I went to bed. I told him I would, mostly so he'd stop looking at me like he was about to stage an intervention. The first morning went exactly how I'd hoped. I left my apartment. Before sunrise, the highway still half empty and soft with early light. I crossed the state line by lunchtime. The trees up along the ridge were already bare. Nothing left but grey branches crowding together like brittle fingers. I didn't mind. I liked how clear everything looked with the leaves gone, like there wasn't anything to hide behind. Every hour or so I pulled over to stretch my legs. Sometimes, I'd just stand there in the gravel breathing in the cold air that smelled faintly of damp bark. Sometimes I wrote a line or two in the little brown notebook I'd stuffed into the glove compartment. Nothing profound, mostly just observations, mile markers, how the ridgeline curved, the way the light shifted from white to gold and back again. It was around 3 in the afternoon when I noticed a turnout on a long bend. It didn't have a sign or any kind of guardrail, just a rough patch of gravel carved into the shoulder. I'd never seen a pull-off without at least a marker. It made me hesitate, but I pulled in anyway. When I got out, I saw the drop-off was steeper than it looked from the road, maybe 30 or 40 ft, straight down to a narrow clearing filled with stunted trees and leaf litter. No trailhead, no picnic tables, not even an old trash barrel. It was like someone had cut this space out of the hill and then forgotten it existed. I stood there for a minute, feeling the chill creep through my sleeves. It was so quiet I could hear my own breath. Then I turned back and saw my driver's door was hanging wide open. I knew I'd shut it. I always do, out of habit. My first thought was that the latch was loose. Maybe the cold had stiffened it somehow. But there was a moment, just a flash, when it crossed my mind that someone else had opened it while my back was turned. I climbed in and pulled the door hard until it caught. The sound echoed against the trees, sharper than it should have been. I tried not to let it get under my skin. I turned the key. The dash lights turned green, but the clock was stuck on 2:14.0. I tapped it with my knuckle. Nothing. It felt like such a small, stupid problem to get worked up about. I told myself it was just an electrical glitch. I checked my phone. 4:38 p.m. I pulled away, determined to shake it off. About half an hour later, I passed a little green sign that said, "Milepost 142. I remember because I'd circled it on my paper. Map that morning just to keep track. 15 minutes later, I passed another sign. Same number. Milepost 142. Again, I slowed to a crawl. My tires crunched over the loose gravel at the shoulder. The Larkspur Highway doesn't have loops. It's a straight shot. North or south, no forks, no hidden turnoffs. I turned the radio dial, hoping for a weather report or some static-laced country station that would prove I was still in familiar territory. Just a wall of hiss, too uniform to even call it static. It sounded like the kind of noise an old TV made when the signal cut out. The third time I passed milepost 142, my stomach tightened in a way I couldn't ignore anymore. I pulled into a turnout that had a faded wooden information board. For one moment, I felt this foolish wave of relief. Like if I could just see the map behind the glass, everything would fall back into place. The map was blank, not vandalized or worn out, just a piece of yellowed paper with no markings at all. I turned in a slow circle. The trees, the road, the pale gravel all looked the same in every direction. I decided I'd call the motel in Arden Falls where I had a reservation. The woman at the desk answered immediately, not even a full ring. I tried to explain that I thought I was turned around somehow, that I might need directions. She cut me off. "You're almost here," she said. Her voice was flat as a closed door. I felt something cold run down my back. "Can you tell me the nearest crossroad?" "You're almost here," she said again, same tone like she was reading it off a script. I hung up. I called my dad next. The call connected, but there wasn't any sound. No breathing, no static, just a dead, hollow line. I waited for nearly a minute before the call ended on its own. I set the phone on the passenger seat and held the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. My heart was going too fast to pretend. It was nothing. I turned around and drove back the way I'd come, scanning for any landmark I'd missed. After 20 minutes, I passed milepost 142 again. I started to wonder if I was looping somehow, if I was too tired to think straight. I remember trying to count my breaths to steady myself, but it didn't help. I pulled over a second time. The air felt sharper when I stepped out, like the temperature had dropped 10 degrees in 5 minutes. I could smell something metallic, like old coins. Farther up the shoulder, maybe 50 yards off, I saw a blue sedan with its hazard lights blinking in, slow, steady pulses. I walked over, hoping someone inside could tell me what was happening. All 4 doors were wide open, no one around. The front seats were pushed too far forward, like someone taller than me had been driving and left in a hurry. I walked around the car once, twice. The third time, I saw a folded piece of paper tucked under the windshield wiper. A receipt. I picked it up carefully, like it might crumble in my hand. November 23rd, 1987. Gasoline, 1158s. No address, no station name. I put it back exactly as I'd found it, feeling my fingertips tingle. When I climbed back into the SUV, I locked every door. The dash clock hadn't budged from 2:14. I drove on. After what felt like an hour, the road dipped under a short concrete bridge. Relief hit me so hard I laughed out loud. I turned under it without thinking. Sure, it would lead me out of whatever this was. Beyond the bridge, the pavement changed. The surface was rough, like it hadn't been paved in years. The trees crowded in so close, I could almost touch the branches if I opened the window. About 100 yards ahead, something lay in the road. A pale canvas tarp spread flat across both lanes. I slowed to a stop. My headlights hit the fabric dead on. It shifted, not like wind, like something underneath it was moving. I reversed until it slid out of view. My hands were shaking. When I tried to pull forward again, the bridge was gone. I kept driving for hours. It felt like I never saw another car. The trees never changed. My phone battery bled down to nothing. I don't remember stopping, but I must have, because the next thing I knew, I was parked outside the Arden Falls motel. It was 9:06 p.m. The clerk came out as I climbed out of the SUV, rubbing her arms against the cold. "I saw you pull in 3 hours ago," she said. "Thought maybe you'd fallen asleep." I didn't tell her anything. In my room, I plugged in my phone. All my photos were gone except one, a single black frame, time-stamped 2:14 p.m. Before dawn, I packed everything back into the SUV and drove home without stopping once. I haven't been back on the Larks Highway. I'm Darren. I was 30 when I decided, completely out of the blue, that hiking solo on the Blue Ridge would fix whatever felt stuck inside me. It was supposed to be simple. I'd just quit my job in Charlotte without any concrete plan. One morning, I sat in the office parking lot for a full 20 minutes, staring at the building's reflection in my car window, waiting for something, anything, to change. Nothing did. I grabbed my badge, tossed it onto the passenger seat, and drove off without saying a word to anyone. No email, no text, just left everything behind. That night, I pulled my gear out of the closet. An old backpack, a bivy sack, a water filter, a headlamp, Everything still functional. I grabbed some freeze-dried meals and convinced myself that a week on the trail would clear my head. 5 or 6 days max. My starting point was near a place called Fairview in Southern Virginia. The first 2 days, I stuck to the main trail, camping at marked sites, falling into a foot hiking rhythm. Cold oatmeal, caffeine, miles, aching legs, sleep. I passed people occasionally. We'd nod, sometimes exchange a single sentence, then drift apart again. But on day 3, I spotted that trail fork. Just a thin line leading off the map. The GPS didn't register it, but there were fresh boot prints in the mud. My brain warned don't go, but my legs seemed to have a mind of their own. Maybe it's a shortcut. Let's see where it leads. At first, it felt fine, but after about an hour, the incline made my shoulders ache and the trees closed in. Roots twisted underfoot, thorny branches snagged at my shirt, and still, I followed those boot prints, hoping someone else had been here recently. I stopped for a snack break, a protein bar and water. I expected to hear birdsong or the wind, or at least a creek gurgling. Instead, nothing. No bird calls, no breeze, just a quiet so dense I thought I might be hearing my own heartbeat. That's when I saw it. A cabin, maybe 100 yards off the trail, half hidden by thick maples and oaks. Its roof sloped inward at the peak, and the siding had faded to a dull grey. One window still had glass. The rest were boarded up. No smoke. From the chimney, no tire tracks. But it didn't feel abandoned. It felt watched. I walked forward slowly, my boots creaking on the porch boards. I knocked twice, my heart thumping against my ribs. Called out, "Hello?" My voice seemed louder than I intended. Silence. I was halfway back down the steps when the door creaked open just a crack, enough for someone inside to peek out. And I saw that eye, bloodshot and jittery. "Sorry, didn't mean to bother you," I managed, my voice low. But nothing else happened. I climbed down, turned my back, and hurried off. 10 minutes later, I realized I'd turned the wrong way. I pulled out the compass. The needle hung motionless. The GPS displayed no signal. Panic shot through me, but I tried to stay calm. I retraced, my steps counting tree markers, watching the ground. 20 minutes later, I arrived back at the exact same clearing. The cabin looked the same, sagging roof, broken steps, but this time the door was wide open, maybe 7 feet wide. No eye, no sound, just that door hanging open. My legs seized up. I stumbled backward and then bolted. I didn't stop looking back. My shin caught on a root and I went down hard, scratching my palms and hands. I pushed myself up and kept going, shouting into the forest for no one. I must have run for half an hour until I burst into a clearing on a slope. I gasped for breath and stepped forward. There it was, a second cabin, newer, well kept. Warm yellow light glowed from the window. Smoke curled out of the chimney. I marched up and banged on the door until it swung open. I was panting hard. An older woman stood there, grey hair pulled back neatly. Her eyes looked like stones. She looked me up and down. "You're not supposed to be here," she stated. I explained I was lost, that I just needed to call someone. "No phone," she replied. Her tone wasn't unfriendly, just matter of fact. She paused, then stepped aside. "Come inside." Inside was warm. A wood stove crackled, a single table, 2 chairs. On one shelf, rows of glass jars, food preserved, sealed with brown lids. I looked at them, feeling hungry, cold, and exhausted all at once. She gestured to the chair across from her. "Where'd you come from?" "North Ridge," I said, trying to piece my thoughts together. "There's this trail that led to a cabin." I tried to backtrack, but my words trailed off. "There's no trail on the North Ridge," she stated plainly. "But I saw boot prints," I insisted. She said nothing, just lifted one hand and rested it on the table. "Do you know about that cabin?" I asked. She stared at the stove, then looked at me, then said softly, "People come out here sometimes. They don't always come back." Something tightened in my chest. I swallowed hard. "You can stay here tonight," she offered. "But you'll leave at dawn." I nodded, relief washing over me. Spread my bivy mat on the floor near the stove, kept my boots on. I didn't ask why or offer thanks. I was just grateful. She stayed awake all night, perched in that chair. The stove's flame reflected off her glasses. Every few minutes, she murmured something so low I couldn't make it out, except one time when I clearly heard, "watching." Around 2 a.m., I heard something outside, barely audible. Footsteps, slow and deliberate. They circled the cabin and once stopped right next to the wall behind me. I leaned forward, feeling whispers brush across my skin, like a breath on my neck. I whispered to her, "Do you hear that?" She didn't say a word, just nodded, remained frozen, eyes fixed on the door. I lay awake until dawn, tracing the flickering fire as it slowly died. She stayed motionless, eyes on the door. When morning came, she didn't speak much. She handed me a stub of charcoal, maybe 6 inches long, black and dusty. "Draw a circle on every tree you pass," she instructed. "Don't stop, don't look back, don't speak." "Why?" I asked. Her gaze held mine. "Because they'll try to make you." She offered no further explanation. Outside, fog lay low across the forest floor. I started walking away from the cabin, tapped the charcoal onto each tree trunk, leaving a dark, deliberate circle. Each time I paused halfway through the mark and listened. I could hear it then. Soft footsteps, maybe half a dozen paces behind me. I didn't turn. After a few marks, something hissed my name. It didn't feel human. I held my breath and coated more circles. Once I saw something shift in my peripheral vision, just a tower of black between 2 trees. I blinked and it was gone. My hand shook so badly I dropped the charcoal. I sank to my knees, hands sweeping in the dirt. When I found it, I got up and kept going, ignoring the scrapes on my knees, ignoring the weight in my chest. After nearly an hour, I saw a splintered wooden post ahead. A bent metal sign swung weakly from the top. Appalachian Trail, stamped on it. I sprinted from there. Branches whipped my arms. Roots stabbed the sides of my feet. But I ran down the slope until I hit gravel and saw my car parked there under a pine canopy. I fumbled for the keys with numb fingers and looked back into the woods. Nothing. No cabin, no path, just trees and shadows. Months later, I was back home, scrolling satellite images of the area. I zoomed in repeatedly. Nothing. No cabins, no forks, just green. I keep the charcoal stub in my desk drawer now. When I need to remember, I open the drawer and hold it in, my hand. It feels sturdy. Then 2 months ago, I hiked a different part of the Blue Ridge with a friend. He took a photo of me standing by a tree, joking that I looked haunted. Later, I looked closer at the tree behind me. Low on the trunk, faint but unmistakable. It was a black ring drawn into the wood, almost invisible unless you knew to look. That's how I know it wasn't just my mind. That cabin, those marks. My name is Marissa. I was 31 the weekend it happened. My cousin Lena had just finalized her divorce and she needed space. Like, real space. She was feeling overwhelmed by memories in the city, photos, voicemails, mutual friends constantly reminding her of the past. So she asked me to join her on a hiking trip. Just the 2 of us. No cell service, no distractions, no prying eyes. I agreed without thinking twice. After our mum died, Lena was the one who stayed with me during my lowest points. I wasn't about to abandon her when she needed the same support. We chose a remote loop trail in the Blue Ridge Mountains. You know, one of those 2-day backpacking routes that barely show up on most maps. It sounded perfect. No crowds, no campsites with Wi-Fi, no GPS enthusiasts to be found. She even mentioned. The map looked hand-drawn, which sold us on its off-grid charm. We printed it out, double-checked the route, and figured, What could possibly go wrong? At noon, precisely noon, we pulled into the ranger station parking lot. A single faded wooden Jeep sat in front of a dusty station building. No other cars, no rangers visible, not even a squirrel scurrying around. The sign above looked at least 50 years old. The map board outside was missing pins, faded almost to invisibility. The whole place felt like it was frozen in time. We threw our packs on and set off. The first few hours exactly what we'd hoped for. The trail wound upward in switchbacks. Roots curled across our path, acting like natural speed bumps. Cicadas buzzed so loud it sounded like static turned up loud. Lena was quiet, and I probably talked too much. I told stories about idiots at work, replayed memories of childhood pranks we pulled. She smiled occasionally, but mostly just kept walking, her boots hitting the ground in a steady rhythm. I thought it was enough connection. As the sun began to set, we stumbled upon a clearing. There was an old lean-to shelter there, kind of a collapsed triangle of wood and tar paper. One wall had slumped inward. The roof was half collapsed. In front, a circle of blackened rocks. Some rusted beer cans scattered nearby. It looked deserted, like people had fled and never returned. Maybe a decade ago, maybe longer. Lena nodded towards it. "This is where we camp," she said. I hesitated. "This is the kind of spot you see in horror movies, where people get killed." Her laugh echoed through the clearing, bright and genuine. It lifted my spirits somehow. We set up camp. Pads, sleeping bags, the old tarp holding everything together. We boiled water, ate noodles, shared a plastic flask of cheap whiskey. No rush. Stars started to show through gaps in the tarp. By 11 p.m., things felt mellow. The fire dimmed, glowing orange. We lay in our bags, looking up through a hole in the roof at the stars. That's when it started. 3 knocks. Knock, knock. Not the sound of branches breaking or an animal nearby. It was slow, deliberate, somewhere about 20 yards beyond the clearing. Lena tensed. She sat up. "It's a person," she whispered. My chest pounded. I couldn't speak. Even the bugs fell silent. The world went quiet. She clicked her flashlight on. A narrow beam swept the darkness. Only trees. No laughs. No voices. "Hey!" she shouted into the trees. "If this is a joke, cut it out." No response. The light cut through the gloom. She saw nothing. "We should leave," I said. I started packing. Lena joined me. We left our sleeping bags, left the stove. I stomped the fire into the dirt until it hissed dead. We headed back down the trail, but it felt different. Narrower, twisted. Every fork in the path seemed like a trap. Every turn felt wrong. Lena checked the map. The trails didn't match. I figured maybe the darkness was playing tricks on us, or maybe we'd missed a junction. We kept walking. Then we came to another opening, smaller this time, no shelter. Just the same circle pattern of rocks, but inside a spiral arrangement of small bones, possibly from birds, arranged meticulously around a patch of black ash. "Like someone burned something important," Lena whispered, frozen. I shook her. "We have to go," I whispered. She nodded. We turned away. Then the knock came closer. Now, within 15 yards. We ran. No pretense, just sprinting through the undergrowth. Branches slapped our jackets, scratched our skin. I tripped over a root. Lena caught me at the last second. We didn't stop to thank each other. We didn't speak. After what felt like an eternity, I crashed into a weathered sign nailed to a tree, covered in moss, split down the middle. The letters were softly carved. Branchfield. That name wasn't on our map. Neither of us spoke until we looked at each other. "They didn't put that on the map," Lena finally said. I checked our paper map. No Branchfield. Just a loop trail heading back towards the ranger station. This place was off the grid in more ways than one. Then came a whistling sound. Unsteady, not a happy tune, just sharp whistles from the direction the sign was pointing, echoing behind us. I froze. Ahead, between the trees, a figure in a grey jacket, just standing there. No expression on its face. "Look, behind you!" Lena whispered. It turned. Another figure appeared, then another. One by one they emerged, silent, watching. The whistling stopped. "Run!" Lena said. We were off. No trail, no plan, just escape. Dirt dug into our shoes. My lungs burned. Then everything tilted. I twisted my ankle. Didn't care. I climbed over branches thicker than my head. Lena ran ahead, her voice distant and fierce. Then we saw it, sunken into the forest floor, half covered by earth. A cabin, old logs, a slanted roof, faint flickers of light seeping through the seams. No wires, no porch light, just shadows and that faint glow. We reached the porch. I knocked on the door, then again. Silence. And then the door opened. No movement, no creak. It just swung open. Inside, a table with 2 chairs, a small fireplace with faint red coals. Dry, smoky air suggesting someone had been there recently. No furniture beyond that. No people. We shut the door, latched the heavy metal bolt, and sat on the floor with our backs against the logs, motionless. We listened. No knocks, no whistling. Just the old house settling and us until the fire faded to ash. I nodded to Lena. She nodded back. Neither of us said her name. When daylight finally broke, we left. We dumped everything. No packs, no boots, no memory of anything but that cabin. We followed a stream downhill. Hours felt like days. Worse than the cold, worse than the fear. By noon, we stumbled back to the ranger station. Same old Jeep, same cracked window. This time, an old ranger, maybe in his 60s, stood outside. I asked, him, my voice heavy, "What is Branchfield? Where's that trail?" He paused, looked me directly in the eye. "Branchfield? That trail was closed in 1987. Too many people went missing. We don't show it anymore." We followed him inside. He pulled out a newer map. No Branchfield, no spiral bone circles, no dilapidated lean-tos, no cabin. Lena sat in the car, pale as paper. She didn't say a word the whole ride home. All I heard were her eyes blinking against the glass. At gunpoint, I asked her over and over what she remembered. She said just the cabin. And after we ran, everything blurred. She said she blacked out, didn't remember the bones or the watchers in the trees, didn't remember the knocks, but I didn't tell her about the whistling echo, or the way they stared at me without blinking, or the moment the door opened before I reached it. Never thought about going back. I'd been driving Skyline Drive just after sunrise. My friend Danny was slouched in the passenger seat, hood up, earbuds in, head bobbing with that half-sleep sway. Every time we hit a smooth patch, she'd let out a tiny snore. The kind that makes you smirk but not wake them up. Around mile marker 212, the fuel gauge slid just above the red. We probably had 30 mi before it got serious. Problem was, Skyline isn't exactly built for convenience. You can drive for ages without a gas station, and the ones you do find are usually miles off route. I finally dug my phone out, switched off, battery saver, and opened the map. The first 2 options were a solid 20 minutes away. The third, Oak Hollow Fuel, 18 ME, looked promising. The turnoff didn't feel official, just a narrow lane peeling off the main road, marked by a crooked hand-painted sign nailed to a post. The letters were so faded they were almost white. Oak Hollow Fuel too. No brand, no prices, nothing. Still, we hadn't seen another option in nearly an hour, so I took it. The lane was barely wide enough for the car. Dirt crumbled off the edges, and the trees leaned in so far their branches tangled overhead, blocking most of the sky. The farther we went, the heavier the air felt, like the kind of humidity you get before a storm, except there wasn't a cloud in sight. Danny pulled her hood back. "Where are we?" "Gas station," I said, keeping my eyes on the road. "It's close." The GPS counted down 13M03. Then it announced, "You have arrived." Except we hadn't. The road kept going. No pump, no building. Just more cracked pavement winding deeper into the trees. "Guess it's a bit farther," I muttered, even though something in my gut disagreed. 5 minutes later, still nothing. No cross streets, no houses, not even a pull-off to turn around. On my left, the road dropped steeply, too steep to risk backing, up. On the right, the forest pressed in like it was reclaiming the lane. Then the trees, and we rolled into what I guess you could call a clearing. It was maybe the size of a small parking lot. Dirt and gravel, no pavement, and right in the center stood a single gas pump. Not a station, just the pump. No hoses, no canopy, no sign except for half of an old sticker that might once have read regular. The paint had peeled down to rust in places, and the glass on the dials was so clouded you could barely make out the faded numbers underneath. Danny sat up fully, yanking out her earbuds. "Okay, what is this?" I kept the engine running. Maybe the shop's nearby, but there wasn't anything nearby. Just a wall of trees on every side. No driveway, no other cars, no sound except for the idle of my engine. Something moved at the far edge of the clearing. A man stepped out from between the trees. He didn't carry anything, no fuel can, no phone, no tools. He wore dark work pants, a zipped-up jacket, even though it was warm, and his hair was cropped short, so pale it was almost white. His walk was unhurried, steady, like we had all day. I lowered my window halfway. "Hey, do you know if there's another gas station around here?" He didn't answer until he was about 10 FT away. His voice was calm, low, but every word was clear. "You've been going in circles," he said. "You passed here earlier." I gave a short laugh. "Pretty sure this is our first time here. We came straight off Skyline." He shook his head. Same tone, same pace. "You've been going in circles. You passed here earlier." Identical. Not just the words, the delivery. Like someone playing the same, recording twice. Danny leaned toward me. "Let's go." I kept my voice steady. "We just need gas. Is there a proper station close by?" He blinked slowly. "You won't make it back without fuel." Something in the way he said it, like the words meant less to him than they did to me, made my skin feel tight. His eyes flicked past me toward the back seat, then paused on the trunk before returning to my face. My pulse spiked. I shifted into drive. He stepped forward, planting himself right in front of the hood. "You won't make it back without fuel," he said again. "Exactly the same." Danny's hand slammed the lock button. "Click, Lila, go!" I pressed the gas just enough to inch forward. He didn't move at first. When he finally stepped aside, it was slow, almost testing how much space he could take before I stopped. I didn't give him the chance. I drove straight up the incline. The trip was my brainchild. 7 days, drifting down the Blue Ridge Parkway in early October, when the mountains start looking like someone dumped every shade of red and gold from a giant paint bucket. I'd pitched it to my 2 closest friends, and somehow they'd said yes. Claire volunteered as DJ. Marcus claimed snack duty, and I got stuck with most of the driving because apparently I was the only one who enjoys it. We left Richmond before the sun even thought about coming up. The street still damp from sprinklers and the coffee too hot to drink. Claire had a playlist ready that started with easy folksy stuff, music you can half listen to while watching the road, and Marcus was already tearing into a bag of trail mix before we hit the interstate. By the time we'd been driving for a couple hours, he was asking if I wanted almonds flicked into my mouth for driver focus. We were somewhere deep in North Carolina by late afternoon. The parkway was everything I'd pictured. 2 lanes of asphalt, curling up and over ridges, dipping down into valleys, sometimes hugging the side of a mountain so close you could see where the guardrail had been replaced after someone didn't make a turn. Cell service had been spotty all day, but we'd planned for that. No texts, no notifications, just us, the road, and whatever came through the speakers. Around mile marker 300, the air outside had cooled enough that I cracked the window. That's when I noticed how quickly it was getting dark in the dips between ridges. The parkway doesn't bother with streetlights, so once the sun's gone, the only light is what you bring with you. My headlights carved 2 bright cones into the road, and everything else beyond that might as well not have existed. I glanced at the GPS, more out of habit than anything. It told me we had 27 miles to go before we hit Little Switzerland, our stop for the night. Then the little blue car icon stopped moving. At first, I thought maybe the mount had slipped, but the map itself was still visible. Only the position wasn't updating. Then the mileage started acting weird. 27, 03, 1, 8, 1, 9, 6, 423. I tapped the screen. Nothing. I gave it a little shake like maybe that would wake it up. Still nothing. Claire leaned over from the passenger seat and frowned. That's not how numbers work. Marcus laughed from the back. Probably just losing signal. Up here. Happens all the time. Yeah, but GPS doesn't need signal to know we're moving, I said. The road ahead curled sharply left. I slowed, dropped a gear, followed it through. A minute later, another sharp left. Same guardrail, same angle. Déjà vu, Claire muttered. I smiled, but my hand stayed tight on the wheel. 2 minutes later, the same bend again. The only difference was the speed limit sign. 35 map, that's 3 times, I said, forcing a laugh. This road's got copy-paste enabled. We rounded the curve again. This time, the sign read 28 mph. No one laughed. The next time it said 31 mph. Same post, same paint chips, same little vine curling from the bottom like it had been growing there for months. A couple minutes later, we passed an overlook on the right. Gravel pull-off, low wooden fence, a single bench facing the drop. Claire pointed at it. That's cute. We should stop there tomorrow if we pass it again in daylight. 3 minutes later, we passed it again. The second time, the bench leaned forward slightly, one leg disappearing into the gravel. The third time, there was no bench at all. My jaw tightened. Okay, either I'm in the middle of the weirdest déjà vu ever, or I stopped. I didn't want to finish that sentence. Marcus leaned forward between the seats. Could be a weird trick of the parkway. I've heard about people getting turned around. Maybe it loops somehow. Claire shook her head. It's a straight road. One way forward, one way back, no loops. The GPS now claimed we were 1 mile from our stop. I slowed, expecting a turnoff. Nothing. Then the display jumped to 46.3 miles. We drove without speaking for a few minutes, all of us staring a little too hard at the road. That's when something appeared ahead. A faint white glow in the center of our lane. At first, I thought it was my headlights bouncing off a reflective sign, but as we got closer, the glow split into 2 perfect circles side by side, floating right at windshield height. They weren't headlights. There was no car, no body, just 2 cold white orbs hanging in the air. Slow down, Claire whispered. I eased off the gas until we were creeping forward. The lights didn't get closer or move away. They just stayed. When we were maybe 10 yards from them, Marcus said, "They're not on the road." He was right. They were hovering just above it, steady, as if pinned to the air itself. "Go," Claire said. And this time, there was no mistaking the shake in her voice. I hit the gas, the engine roared, and the car surged forward. I braced for an impact that never came. Instead, passing through them felt like driving into cold mist. A faint metallic tang filled the air for just a moment, then vanished. The GPS came back to life like nothing had happened. The blue car icon jumped ahead, and the voice calmly said, "In 2 miles, turn left." The rest of the drive was normal. No repeated bends, no disappearing benches, no floating lights. We pulled into the inn, and the clerk checked us in like any other guest. Upstairs, we locked the room door without saying anything. I hadn't exactly planned on driving the Oak Hollow Scenic Byway by myself that week. Riley and I had been plotting the trip for ages, just a long stretch of days where we could pretend the rest of the world didn't exist. The night before we were supposed to leave, Riley called me. She sounded like she'd been crying for hours, voice all rough and uneven. Her grandfather had collapsed in his kitchen, and she couldn't bring herself to head out of town. I remember standing in my kitchen with the phone pressed to my cheek, just staring at the floor and nodding even though she couldn't see me. After I hung up, I spent almost an hour pacing between the sink and the hallway, trying to decide if I should just stay home. I kept telling myself it would feel pointless to go alone, but in the back of my mind, this quieter voice kept insisting maybe it would be good for me. Maybe I needed a little time in the middle of nowhere more than I realized. So the next morning, I packed up the car like nothing had changed. Sleeping bag, hiking boots, a few days' worth of instant meals, that stupid electric kettle Riley had teased me about because it looked like a toy. I locked the door to my apartment in Asheville and stood there for a second with my hand on the knob, feeling like I was forgetting something. Then I told myself it didn't matter, because whatever it was, I could live without it. The first part of the drive felt exactly the way I'd pictured, long, slow curves winding up into the ridges. Tall trees leaning in over the asphalt like they were trying to keep secrets. I stopped at every scenic turnout I passed, taking a few pictures I knew would look the same as all the others. I figured I'd text them to Riley later once she had a moment to breathe. I never felt uneasy. Not at first. There was a sense of relief in not having to talk, not having to explain what I was doing or where I was going. The road felt like it belonged only to me. It was around 4 in the afternoon when I noticed the gas gauge had slipped under a quarter tank. I remember tapping the dash with my knuckle like that was going to make it bounce back up. It didn't. I'd miscalculated how little was out here. The next green sign I passed was partly rusted out, but I could still read Ellis's Ferry. Fuel 9 miles. There was an arrow pointing down a narrow spur road that didn't even have a shoulder. I pulled over for a second to look at the map, then thought, it's just 9 miles, no big deal. I turned off the byway, and within half a minute, it felt like I'd slipped into some forgotten corridor. The asphalt was cracked and patched in places, and there were no houses or driveways, just that continuous wall of trees on either side, all the branches dull with old lichen. About 2 miles in, the cell reception dropped to 0. That part didn't. Surprised me, but it still made my stomach clench a little. I was used to always having that lifeline in my pocket. Still, I didn't feel scared, just mildly irritated that I hadn't topped off the tank when I had the chance. I kept telling myself there'd be a little station, maybe a diner with a neon sign and a half-asleep clerk, but after 20 minutes, nothing had appeared. The road kept descending in these tight switchbacks, and the light turned that murky grey you get in a hollow. I passed a dead branch in the middle of the lane and thought about how nobody would even know if I got stuck out there. I spotted a gravel turnout the size of a picnic blanket and pulled over, mostly because my pulse was getting too fast. I figured it couldn't hurt to look at the paper map again. When I stepped out, the air had this cold metallic smell, almost like when you leave a wrench out in the rain. I tried not to think about it. Across the road was a leaning wooden trail marker that looked like it hadn't been painted in decades. The letters were mostly shadows, except for a single arrow pointing into the trees. For some reason, that detail made me want to laugh. It was so on the nose, it almost felt fake, like the start of a campfire story. I stood there for a second, feeling ridiculous, but there was a familiar itch in the back of my head. Curiosity always trumped caution for me. I locked the car, stuffed the keys in my front pocket, and crossed the road. The trail dropped away almost immediately. Within about 50 feet, the turnout was hidden behind a wall of laurel and pine. I started counting my steps, partly to keep myself steady. Maybe it led to a creek or an abandoned cabin. A few minutes in, I glanced over my shoulder. The trail was still there, but something about it looked different, like it had shifted angles while I wasn't paying attention. I walked back 10 paces, then 20, trying to spot the road. All I saw was a tangled mass of branches. I told myself I'd missed a bend. I took a deep breath, turned back around, and kept going. That was when I spotted the water bottle. It was lying dead center on the path, the label half peeled and the cap streaked with dirt. I knew that bottle, same brand I'd packed that morning. Trail Spring with that stupid green stripe Riley used to joke about. I felt this sick lurch in my gut. I unzipped the side pocket of my pack and counted. 1, 2. There were supposed to be 3. I picked it up. The plastic was warm, which didn't make sense in the shaded hollow. My throat went tight, and for a second I couldn't swallow. I shoved the bottle into my pack and turned back the way I'd come. That was when I heard the footsteps. They weren't behind me. They were off to my right, maybe 15 feet away, moving through the brush in perfect parallel. I froze. The steps stopped. I swallowed, trying to scrape together a voice. Hello. Nothing. I took a cautious step. The steps resumed exactly matching mine. My scalp prickled so hard it almost stung. I started moving faster, every part of me screaming to get back to the road. The trail curved left around a big fallen log. I thought if I moved quickly, I could catch whoever was shadowing me. I stepped past the trunk. That's when I saw the figure. Someone was standing behind a boulder, half hidden, wearing a blue parka. The hood was up. No face I could see. My mind just slipped. That was my parka, the one I'd left rolled up in the back seat. Hey. I tried again, softer this time. Nothing. No flinch. No acknowledgement. I took a step closer, heart hammering. The figure turned in one smooth motion and walked deeper into the trees like it knew exactly where it was going. I backed up so fast I almost slipped. My mouth was dry as paper. The footsteps started again, slow and deliberate. Didn't look back. I just walked faster, then faster again, until my boots were sliding on wet leaves. Every time I paused, the steps paused too. When I finally saw the clearing ahead, I broke into a run. My chest felt tight, like I'd been holding my breath the whole time. My car sat there exactly as I'd left it. For 1 second, I almost believed I'd imagined everything. Then I saw the passenger door standing wide open. I knew I'd locked it. I edged closer, feeling like something was about to lunge out. The pack on the seat was unzipped. The bottle I'd picked up was gone. I didn't bother checking the back seat. I got in, slammed the door, and fumbled the keys into the ignition. The engine made a weak grinding noise before it caught. I reversed too fast, tires spitting gravel, hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the wheel straight. The road back to the byway felt twice as long. Every bend looked the same. I kept checking the mirror, expecting to see that blue hood appear between the trees. When I finally hit the pavement, I didn't stop. I drove north for half an hour, didn't even look at the gas gauge. Eventually, my phone buzzed back to life. A long line of missed calls and texts. I pulled into a turnout just to catch my breath. That's when I saw the footprint. One dark smear of mud on the back seat, a left boot print about my size. I never heard the door open, never saw anyone climb in. I called Riley and told her I'd decided to come home early. I didn't mention the trail or the figure or the parka. Some things feel better left unsaid. I left before sunrise the next morning. Haven't been back to Oak Hollow since. I was driving up Blue Ridge Parkway to meet my cousin at a trailhead. I'd left home while it was still pitch dark out, hoping I'd get there early enough to grab a good parking spot before all the weekend hikers showed up. My cousin Aaron and I had been talking about this trip since last October. You know how it is. One of those plans you keep bringing up over texts and calls until you feel like the idea of it is more real than the actual doing. I didn't want to give either of us a chance to back out this time. The night before, I'd borrowed my dad's Subaru. He still calls it the reliable tank, even though half the dashboard lights are always blinking, and loaded up a cooler with turkey sandwiches, a couple of granola bars, and some of those little bottles of electrolyte drink that always taste vaguely like cough syrup. I even printed out the directions because Aaron swore that part of the parkway had a dead zone the size of a small country. The first hour of the drive was peaceful in that way. Early mornings can be when no one else is around to crowd you. The sky slowly went from black to a washed-out grey, then to that bright, clear blue you only see up in the hills. Every so often, I'd pass somebody else hauling a kayak or a bike, and it felt comforting to know there were other people awake doing normal things. I was about 30 pounces past Briar Falls when I noticed the sign on the right, "Overlook 1 mile." The paint was so cracked, it looked like the wood itself was splintering underneath. I thought about pulling over to stretch my legs, but figured I'd keep going a little longer. Maybe 10 minutes later, I spotted the exact same sign. Same spot, same chunk, missing from the lower corner. I tried to convince myself it was a different sign that just looked identical. Maybe whoever maintained this road had a bulk discount on wooden markers. I slowed down anyway. The next tree had a small rusted mile marker nailed to it. 272. I drove on. Another curve, another overlook, 1 mile sign. By the time I passed it for the third time, I was gripping the wheel hard enough my palms were starting to hurt. I pulled over onto the gravel shoulder, which made a clattering noise under the tires that felt weirdly loud. My phone came alive for a second, the screen glowing in my hand, but it just stayed on the loading symbol, never pulling up the map. After a few seconds, the glow faded. I tapped the screen like an idiot, hoping maybe force would kick the signal. Back on. Nothing. I got out of the car and the quiet hit me immediately. It wasn't the peaceful kind of quiet. It felt thick, heavy in my ears. No wind rustling the branches, no birds, not even the distant hum of another car. I walked maybe 30 or 40 yards up the road. My boots scuffed over little bits of gravel and pine needles, and it sounded like the only noise left in the whole stretch of woods. I kept expecting to see another marker, or at least a turnout, but it was just an unbroken line of trees on both sides. When I turned to look back, the Subaru seemed too far away. Not impossible, just off enough to make my chest go tight, like the distance had doubled while I wasn't watching. I climbed back inside and shut the door a little harder than I meant to. I checked the clock on the dashboard, 154. I blinked at it. When I stopped looking, it was 9:28. I'd been out of the car maybe 5 minutes at most. I remember tracing my thumb over the little digital numbers, like maybe they'd flicker back to something sensible if I stared hard enough. I turned the key. The dash lights all went dark for a split second, then surged back on. The speedometer needle jumped and settled. I pulled back onto the road. The same sign greeted me. Overlook 1 mile. I don't know how long I drove after that. I stopped checking the clock because it only made my pulse jump. Somewhere past another bend, I saw a silver sedan on the shoulder. The driver's door was hanging wide open and the hazard lights were blinking in a slow, steady rhythm. My first thought was that maybe someone else was lost in whatever was happening. I slowed to a crawl. A man stood behind the car, one hand pressed, flat against the trunk, the other lifted to his ear like he was trying to hear something. I leaned out the window and called, "Hey, do you need help?" No reaction. His head was tilted a little, like he was listening for something in the trees. I inched forward, pulled over ahead of him, and stepped out. The gravel under my boots made that same crackling sound. It was the only noise. "Sir," I tried again, louder. Nothing. I circled around to see his face. His mouth was moving, shaping words I couldn't hear. His eyes were blank and glassy, not blinking. I felt a pulse of cold sweat under my collar. "Can you hear me?" He turned his head toward me so abruptly I stumbled back a step. His pupils were tiny dots. And for one awful second, I was sure he was staring right past me at something I couldn't see. I backed up until my shoulder blades hit my car door. My hand fumbled over the handle, fingers slipping. When I looked back, he hadn't moved. His mouth was still working silently. I climbed inside, slammed the door, and twisted the ignition so fast my wrist cracked. I pulled onto the road without checking the mirror. The next curb held the same, sign again. I didn't mean to, but I let out this raw, panicked yell that sounded like it belonged to someone else. I kept driving. The sky brightened, then dimmed again, like time was skipping around. My gas gauge dropped toward empty. Still, the sign kept appearing. Eventually, the road flattened out. The trees grew sparse, and I spotted a small wooden building up ahead. A ranger station. There was a white pickup parked outside, like a lifeline. I braked so hard I almost cracked my ribs against the seatbelt. I half stumbled out and pounded on the door. It opened, and a ranger in a brown uniform blinked at me. He had that look people get when they can tell something's wrong, but don't know if you're about to throw up or start screaming. "Hey, are you okay here?" "I've been driving this road all day," I said, my voice shaking. "I keep seeing the same mile marker." There was a man in a silver sedan. He wouldn't talk to me. He stepped out and glanced down the road. Nothing but empty pavement, stretching into the trees. "When did you see him?" he asked carefully. "I don't know. Hours ago. My phone's dead. My dashboard clock is wrong. I don't know how long I've been out here." He watched me like he was trying to decide if I was making it up, but he didn't look skeptical, more like he was already familiar with what I was describing. "I've been working here 13 years, he said finally. "People get turned around sometimes, but they don't all see the same thing." I didn't have the energy to ask what that meant. He offered to call someone to escort me to the highway. I told him no. I just wanted to get away from that stretch of road. He waited on the porch while I pulled out. I never looked in the rearview mirror. When the road finally opened up into familiar gas stations and real exit signs, I pulled over and rested my head on the steering wheel. My hands were shaking so hard I couldn't even pull them away. I never called Aaron to explain why I didn't show up. My name's Luke. I was 19 when I decided I needed to disappear for a little while. So, one night I stayed up late, scrolling through a bunch of strange rental listings, and found a cabin that looked like it had been posted by someone who barely knew how the internet worked. It was cheap, off-grid, no Wi-Fi, no cell service. The description just said, "Quiet, remote, peaceful for those who need space." That word stuck with me. Space, not metaphorical space, actual physical space. No one around for miles. Space, the kind that doesn't buzz or beep or pull your attention in 100 directions. The cabin was 10 miles up a gravel road in the Blue Ridge Mountains, just past a little dot on the map called Dalton Creek. I booked it for a week. I left early on a Monday, threw a duffel bag in the trunk, and drove 6 hours straight. The last stretch of road barely qualified as a road. My tires kicked up so much dust I couldn't see more than 10 feet behind me, and the trees pressed in tight on both sides. When I finally reached the cabin, I almost couldn't believe it was real. It looked like something from a history book, green shutters hanging crooked on the hinges, moss climbing up the wood siding, and a big chimney that looked like it had been hand-built one stone at a time. There was no one to greet me, just a typed note stuffed in the mailbox. The key was under a flat red rock. A note mentioned the generator was in the shed. No Wi-Fi, no phone service. Use the wood stove at night. It was it. I got inside just before the sun went down, dragged my stuff in, locked the door behind me, and stood in the center of the single-room cabin, just listening. But there wasn't anything to hear. It wasn't the peaceful kind of quiet. It was thick, like the silence had weight. No wind, no birds, no bugs, no creaks from the floorboards or groans from the roof, just nothing. I cleared my throat just to break the tension, and it sounded too loud. I told myself maybe the altitude was messing with my ears. Maybe I was so used to background noise that the absence of it felt wrong. I made some instant noodles on the little propane stove, grabbed a beer from the cooler, and sat out on the porch. The trees were dark shapes, and the stars were clearer than I'd ever seen. I leaned back and tried to let my brain slow down. It was hard at first, but after a while, I started to feel like I'd made the right choice. No distractions, just space. Around 2 a.m., I woke up with my heart pounding. No nightmare, no sound, just wide awake, like someone had snapped their fingers next to my ear. I stared at the rafters for a second, trying to figure out what had pulled me out of sleep. Then I heard it. Footsteps on gravel. Not rushing or panicked, just steady crunch. A pause, then another crunch, another pause, then silence. I held my breath and slid out of bed. The flashlight on the table felt heavy in my hand. I crept to the front window and pulled the curtain aside just an inch. The porch was empty. The trail was empty. The moonlight made everything look a little surreal, like watching a black and white photograph. Nothing moved, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been there and was maybe still out there, just far enough back in the trees that I couldn't see them. I sat up the rest of the night with the lights on. The next morning, I checked the ground outside. The porch was wet, maybe from an early rain. I shrugged it off as maybe a local kid playing a prank, but then it got worse. Night 3. Pacing, steps across the porch planks, back and forth. I froze at the window and watched. When I opened the door mid-step, it all stopped, as if someone had hit pause. Night 4. I didn't sleep at all. I sat by the window in the dark, flashlight off, phone in hand. I needed eyes on the porch when the pacing started. That night, there was an extra sound. Chimes, gentle metallic notes. Tink, 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 tink coming from the woods. I didn't have chimes, didn't see any around. Just that soft, rhythmic disturbance from beyond the trees. Creepy, but quiet. Then it stopped. I scanned the wood line, caught nothing. So the next morning I drove into town, picked up battery-powered motion sensor lights and a basic security camera. The guy at the checkout raised an eyebrow when I said where I lived. He only said, "Old Stone Path, that's some freaky place." I didn't ask what he meant. Back at the cabin, I mounted the lights along the porch and driveway, set the camera facing the door. That night, I waited. I barely dozed. When I checked the feed in the morning, there was a 15-second gap at exactly 2:17 a.m. Static, but the porch light had turned on during that gap. When the feed resumed, nothing. No figure, no animal. It was too clean. An intentional blackout. The kind of things someone with equipment could pull off. It fixed my attention on that time. Night 6, around 2 a.m., I was drifting off when something slammed into the side of the cabin. A sharp crack like someone punching the wall or worse. I hunched, grabbed my knife from the nightstand, and flicked on the flashlight. I crept down, the hall, lights off, ears straining. Outside, footsteps circled, slow, heavy, gravel crunching. One step, pause, another. They made a loop around the cabin. I edged to the kitchen window, pressed my face to the glass. There was something low, crawling between the trees. Not an animal. The limbs jerked unnaturally long, like someone dragging themselves. Then a whisper inside. I couldn't catch the words, but it was clearly coming from the hallway. My breath caught. I bolted for the bedroom, slammed and barricaded the door with a dresser. At dawn, I walked around the outside. On the porch, I found 6 piles of twigs, each arranged into a perfect triangle, all pointed at the front door like markers. I swept them away with my broom. Didn't tell anyone. That afternoon, I went to town and asked about weird stuff along Old Stone Path. The hardware store guy paused, looked at me, then asked quietly, "You up near the dead end?" I nodded. He whispered, "Get out before the full moon." I left empty-handed. Couldn't bring myself to buy anything else there. That night was quiet. No pacing, no slams, nothing until 3:08. I am. That's when I heard my name. Just one word. "Logan," whispered from inside the cabin. I was on the couch, knife in hand, heart pounding. I hadn't heard a door open or a window break. I followed my name into the hallway, and there it was. Nobody. And then the light flickered. For a heartbeat, I saw a long, hunched shadow stretch across the wall. Then just nothing. I ran back to the bedroom, and didn't sleep again. 2 days later, I packed everything, left mid-morning, and checked into a cheap motel, slept 2 nights, straight, ate cereal, watched TV. Life felt normal again, but I couldn't stop thinking about my stuff back at the cabin. The camera, the knife, the twigs. On the 3rd day, I went back to get my things, pulled in and saw the door slightly ajar. Inside, every kitchen drawer was pulled wide open. Silverware was arranged in rows on the floor. Forks, spoons, knives, each spaced exactly the same distance apart. I stepped over them, held my phone up, and filmed it all. My bedroom door was closed. I cracked it. On the bed was another pile of sticks. 7 triangles now, arranged in a circle, and my knife, the same knife from my nightstand, lying dead center. I froze. Never touched anything else, just grabbed my bag and left. Drove straight back to Asheville. Found a room with a roommate. Never talked about the cabin again. 3 weeks later, I got a text from the landlord. "Did you leave something in the attic? There's some weird stuff up there." I'd never gone into the attic once. I ignored him. 2 days later, he texted a photo. 7 triangles burned into the old attic planks. The same pattern, the same eerie perfection. He didn't ask anything else. I didn't reply. I changed my number shortly after. And I've never driven down Old Stone Path again. Last October, I decided I needed an escape. I took a solo hiking trip into the Blue Ridge Mountains. Just me and my pack. No distractions. I'd just turned 30 and things didn't feel quite right. My job was draining the life out of me. My social media feeds felt like a continuous loop of people pretending their lives were perfect, and I couldn't recall the last time I truly felt present. I needed to unplug, both literally and figuratively. So, I put my phone on airplane mode, packed my gear, and drove into Virginia with the idea of hiking a trail segment that wasn't on any mainstream maps. Something truly off the grid. Sleep under the stars. Just disappear for a few days. I parked my car at a gravel pull-off a couple miles beyond the last ranger station. No signs, no official trailhead, just a narrow path barely visible through a break in the trees. I'd found it on an old backpacker forum, hadn't been updated in over a decade. Some user, Wilder Ghost, had posted about a forgotten loop trail near Briar Hollow, claimed it wasn't on any modern maps. The description painted it as this secret part of the woods that time had forgotten. That's precisely what I was looking for. The initial stretch of the hike felt just right, peaceful. The only sounds were birds overhead and the occasional scurry of something small in the undergrowth. The trail started out fairly clear, though narrow. I could see where it had been maintained in the past, even though years had passed without attention. The trees were tall and straight, and the leaves had just started to dry out. That early phase where everything feels on the verge of changing. For the first hour or so, I felt good, focused, light. Then the trail started to feel strange. The trees began growing too close together, not overgrown, but as if they were leaning in. In some spots, I had to turn sideways to pass. I figured it was just the nature of a trail no one used, but it felt unnatural. Not like it had grown wild, like something had deliberately shaped it that way. That's when I saw the boot. A single black hiking boot placed upright on a flat rock, as if someone had carefully put it there. No laces. The leather was dry and cracked, as if weathered by seasons outdoors. It wasn't discarded. It wasn't half buried in leaves. It was set there deliberately, neatly. I stopped and stared at it for a moment. Then I looked around and said, "Hey, someone lose a boot?" A stupid thing to say, but it just came out. No response, not even the sound of birds. I waited another second. Nothing. Then I just kept moving, trying hard not to let it get into my head. But after that, I started noticing more things that seemed out of place. A thin wire, perhaps fishing line, strung low across a bush. Almost missed it. Looked like it had been set to trip something or someone. Then a tree stump, maybe a foot high, covered in tiny carvings. Stick figures, dozens of them, all with round, open mouths, as if screaming or gasping. One of them had a little square carved into its chest, looked like a door or a window. I stopped looking too closely. After that, I picked up my pace. About a mile later, I came across a metal sign nailed to a tree. No words, no arrows, just a red handprint, palm down, fingers spread wide. The paint was old, faded, and cracked, and the whole thing had a crusty appearance, like dried glue or perhaps peeling skin. I reached out and touched it. It crumbled under my fingers, powdery. I should have turned back then. I thought about it, but I figured I was just getting spooked, that I was probably just spooked. I kept going. That's when I heard the footsteps. Not a deer, not rustling brush. These were distinct human footsteps, close enough to make out their rhythm, but whenever I stopped, they stopped too. I crouched behind a log and held my breath, waiting. Then I saw them, legs bare, pale skin, just standing motionless behind a tree about 20 feet off the trail. They weren't moving, just there. I watched, unsure of what I was seeing. Then slowly, they stepped backward. One step, then vanished. I didn't say anything, didn't yell. I just stood up and walked quickly, eyes fixed forward. I don't know how long I kept going, but when the light started to fade, I knew I had to stop for the night. My phone still had no signal, and the compass app was acting erratically, unable to find north. I chose a small clearing near a slope and set up my tent, unrolled my sleeping bag. I tried to get comfortable, but the ground felt wrong, too soft, spongy. I pressed down with my hand, and it gave way more than it should have, almost like there was foam or something underneath. But I told myself it was just soft soil. Around midnight, I woke up to whispering, not outside the tent, but inside, right next to me. It wasn't clear words, just this frantic, rushed whisper, like someone curled up beside me, breathing directly into my right ear. I froze, then grabbed my flashlight and swung it around. Nothing. The tent was empty. I scrambled out the front and just stood there, scanning the woods. No wind, no sound, as if everything had stopped. I didn't go back inside. I sat with my back against a tree and held my knife until the sky started to lighten. At dawn, I broke camp quickly. No breakfast. Didn't bother with the map. I just followed the trail the way I thought I'd come. But the path felt off. An hour in, I was still going downhill, and nothing looked familiar. Then I hit this clearing. 6 stone piles, each about my height, arranged in a perfect circle. In the center was a wooden frame, like a door missing its house. 2 upright beams with a crossbeam on top. Hanging from it was a strip of red fabric. It was my bandana, the one packed deep in my bag that I hadn't touched since I started out. I turned and ran. Didn't care which way, just moved. After another hour or so, crashing through trees, I found a cabin. No trail leading to it, no road, just a square wooden structure, a thin stream of smoke rising from the chimney. I knocked. The door creaked open and an old man looked out. Thin, bony face. His eyes seemed too wide, as if perpetually staring. "You ain't supposed to be out here," he said. I told him I was lost, that I'd gotten turned around the day before. I needed help. He didn't speak for a few seconds, then he just stepped aside. The cabin was empty inside, no furniture, just rows of glass jars lined up on the floor. Each contained something floating, pale things. Some looked like birds. Others I couldn't identify, but they all had eyes staring out from inside the glass. "I saw you yesterday," he said. "You were walking in circles." I asked if he had a phone. He shook his head. "Don't work out here," he said. "Nothing works." Then he pointed at the wall. Not a door, just the wall. "Keep straight. he said. "Don't stop. Don't turn around. If you hear your name." I didn't ask questions. I left and walked exactly the direction he pointed. About 30 minutes in, I heard it. Joe, my name, soft but close, like someone was walking just behind me. I didn't turn. 10 minutes later, again, louder this time, almost right at my shoulder. "Joel." I ran. I didn't stop until I hit the trailhead. The sun was just starting to dip and there was my car. No damage, no sign anyone had touched it. I drove straight until I hit a gas station in a town called Redwick, parked in the back and just sat there, doors locked, for nearly an hour. I was 26 the first time I drove the Blue Ridge Parkway. I marked a weekend on my calendar, cleared my schedule, and told everyone I'd be unreachable. 3 days on the road, sleeping in the back of my car, photographing every overlook worth stopping at. I started early before sunrise, with a travel mug of coffee balanced in the cup holder and my camera bag riding shotgun. The first few hours were exactly what I'd hoped for. Empty curves that made me want to keep driving forever. The occasional hiker disappearing into a trailhead. A lone cyclist hunched over their handlebars. I stopped constantly, leaning against my car to take shots of ridgelines stacked on top of each other like fading paper cutouts. The clouds hung low and lazy. And for a while, I didn't care how long it took me to get anywhere. Somewhere past mile marker 280, I saw it. It wasn't on the map I'd studied the night before. No sign announcing an overlook. No picnic tables, just a narrow gravel pull-off with a sagging wooden guardrail and grass working its way up through the cracked pavement. It didn't look like much. Honestly, the view wasn't impressive at first glance, but something about the way the drop-off hit my peripheral vision made me slow down. It seemed sharper than it should be, like the land had been cut away in one clean slice. I got out with my camera. The air had that faint metallic tang you sometimes smell right before it rains. Even though the sky was clear, I stepped closer to the guardrail and looked down. The valley below didn't make sense. It was too symmetrical. Two ridges rising almost straight up like the walls of a canyon, and between them, a dark chasm that dropped straight down. There was no slope, no tangle of trees clinging to the sides, just empty blackness. I took a few photos and glanced at the screen. Solid black images. I checked the lens cap even though I knew it wasn't on. Adjusted the settings, took more shots. Still black. The light meter said everything was fine. I lowered the camera, frowning. That's when I realized I wasn't alone anymore. A faded blue sedan sat right behind my car. I hadn't heard it pull in. No tires on gravel, no engine noise until now. The motor idled softly. The kind of quiet hum you only hear when you're listening for it. The driver's window was down, but the person inside wasn't looking at me. They were staring straight ahead at the road like they were waiting for someone. I gave a quick wave, more out of habit than anything else. No response, no shift of the head, not even a blink that I could see. The longer I stood there, the more wrong it felt. I got back in my car, locked the doors without thinking, and pulled out. My GPS said the next overlook was 10 mi ahead. I focused on the road, trying not to glance in the rear view. The parkway twisted endlessly. 10 mi should have passed in maybe 15 minutes, but the road just kept looping. The mile markers ticked by 281, 282, 283, and still no sign of the overlook. Then the trees opened up. My stomach sank. It was the same cracked pull-off, the same warped guardrail, the same blue sedan. Only this time, the driver's head was turned toward me. From a distance, the face looked normal, but as I rolled closer, details stopped lining up. The skin was smooth, featureless, no eyes, no mouth, nothing. Just the shape of a head. I pressed the gas harder than I meant to. The next few miles were a blur of curves and mismatched mile markers. I passed 282 again. My grip on the wheel tightened until my knuckles ached. I told myself not to look back, but eventually I did. The sedan was there 100 yards back. never gaining, never falling behind. Minutes stretched, then maybe an hour. I wasn't sure anymore. My fuel gauge was dipping lower than I liked. But I kept telling myself I just needed to reach an intersection somewhere that could break this loop. The tank hit empty. I had no choice but to pull over. The woods flanked both sides of the road, dense enough that I couldn't see more than a few feet in. The air was still, no bird calls, no rustle of leaves. I shut off the engine and sat there. My phone was useless without service. That's when headlights flared in my mirror. The sedan eased into view, slowing as it passed. The driver turned their head toward me. I still couldn't read any expression, but I had the horrible sense they were waiting to see what I'd do. Then they rolled on, disappearing around a bend. I didn't think I just twisted the key. The engine coughing to life. The fuel light blinked like it was scolding me, but I pushed forward. The trees overhead leaned until they formed a tunnel, blocking out the sky. When the sedan appeared in my mirror again, closer this time, I jerked the wheel onto the first side road I saw. It was a single lane, no lines, no shoulder. My GPS map went blank, but the road straightened. The trees thinned, and after what felt like forever, a green sign appeared. High GHW, a Y221, 3 miles. Liam and I had been talking about this trip since last fall, mostly in that half-serious way where you're not sure if it's going to happen until you've actually set a date. We wanted a slow, easy drive along the Blue Ridge Parkway. No deadlines, no hotel check-ins, no one expecting us anywhere. The only rule was that we'd skip the interstate and stop whenever we felt like it. I'd done short stretches of the parkway before, but this time we planned to go so deep that cell service would vanish completely. Just us, the car, and however far the road went. We set out just after sunrise on a Friday in late May. For the first few hours, it was exactly the kind of trip we'd pictured. Steady climbs, rolling ridges, overlooks that made the world look unreal. We pulled over for photos a couple of times, ate lunch from the cooler in the back seat, and laughed about how we'd probably end up with weird seatbelt tan lines by the end of it. By early afternoon, the road had emptied out. No more RVs grinding uphill, no cyclists creeping along the shoulder, just the occasional car passing us in the opposite lane. The forest crowded closer as we went, the curves tightening until you couldn't see more than 100 feet ahead at a time. Somewhere after mile marker 280, we spotted it, a weathered wooden sign leaning slightly, almost buried in waist-high weeds. The paint was cracked and faded, but you could still make out the words, "Scenic view 4 miles." An arrow pointed toward a narrow strip of pavement cutting off to the right. It didn't look like the other overlooks. No big brown sign, no gravel lot, just a single lane of aging asphalt with no center line. Liam glanced over at me. "What do you think?" "Could be nothing," I said. "Could be cool, that was enough." He slowed down and made the turn. The road dipped right away and curled sharply to the left, pulling us under a canopy of trees so thick the sky was reduced to tiny shards of light between leaves. At first, I kept checking the odometer, expecting we'd find the overlook quickly, but the road kept winding. No driveways, no trail markers, nothing. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The pavement grew rougher in spots, edges crumbling where grass had started to creep in. "Feels longer than 4 miles, I said. "Maybe the sign's old," Liam replied. That was when I saw the figure. It stood in the middle of the road, maybe 50 yards ahead, facing away from us. From that distance, it looked like someone wearing a plain hoodie, grey or tan, but the hood didn't move right. It wasn't shifting with their head or the air. It was too smooth. We slowed to a crawl. About 20 yards away, the figure stepped toward the edge of the road, but it didn't walk. It just slid sideways, straight as a post, and vanished into the trees. Neither of us said anything right away. "Probably a hiker," Liam muttered. "There's no trail," I said. We drove on. The forest seemed to press even closer now, and the pavement was buckled in places where roots had forced their way up from underneath. I glanced at my watch. 3:42 p.m., but the light felt wrong. Not dim exactly, but like late afternoon was closing early. Then Liam asked, "Do you hear that?" At first, I thought it was the sound of our tires hitting the rough spots in the road, but then I caught the rhythm. Soft, evenly spaced thuds, footsteps, keeping pace with the car. I looked toward the trees, but the undergrowth was too dense to see through. The sound stopped as we rounded the next bend. The sound faded so completely, it was like it had never been there. Liam kept his hands tight on the wheel, eyes fixed on the bend ahead. Neither of us said anything. The next stretch was narrower still. The asphalt cracked and broken in places where the roots had forced their way through. Grass sprouted from the gaps, and I noticed patches of moss growing along the center, like nothing heavy had passed this way in years. Then the trees opened just enough to give us a longer view of the road ahead. That's when I saw the car. It was an old blue sedan parked half off the asphalt. The driver's door was hanging wide open like someone had just stepped out. Liam slowed to a crawl without me having to say anything. The windshield was coated in a pale, dusty film, the kind that doesn't appear overnight. Inside, it was stripped bare. No papers in the glove box, no trash in the footwells, no floor mats, nothing except for the passenger seat. The fabric there was darker than the rest. Wet, not just damp, soaked. It caught what little light there was, glistening like it had been freshly poured over. "Keep going," I said more sharply than I meant to. Liam didn't argue. The sedan disappeared in the mirror after a few seconds. We rounded another bend and my stomach dropped. The figure was back, dead center in the road. This time, it was facing us. It stood completely still, head tilted slightly to one side. From this distance, I could see the slit where a face should have been. And now I knew it wasn't a hood at all. The smooth curve over its head and shoulders was part of it, flesh-like. The slit opened just enough to show teeth. Way too many teeth. Liam swore under his breath and jerked the wheel. The tires skidded against the gravel edge. The car jolted so hard I braced for the crash. Instead, the trees broke apart. Sunlight poured through the windshield, blinding after the dim of that road. We were back on the Blue Ridge Parkway. No side road behind us, no sign. Liam didn't slow down, and I didn't ask him to. We drove until the parkway straightened out into a familiar stretch I remembered passing hours earlier. It was another 15 minutes before we reached a small town. We pulled into a gas station, but didn't get out right away. Liam kept his hands on the wheel, fingers flexing like he couldn't quite let go yet. When we finally spoke, it wasn't about what we'd seen. It was about how much farther we could get on this tank, which way we'd head home. Anything but that road. Later, back at my place, we tried to find it. We pulled up maps, checked GPS logs, even went through satellite images of the area. Nothing. No 4-mile side road. No overlook matching where we turned. I was 29 when this happened. I'd picked up extra hours at the distribution center on River Hill Road, trying to save up for a better place. The warehouse was always freezing in October, and by the end of my shift, my shoulders ached from hauling pallets around. It was a little past 11:30 when I finally clocked out. I remember standing in the lot, rubbing my palms together like that would do anything. My old Corolla was parked under one of those buzzing floodlights, and I sat there for a minute before I even started it up. I just couldn't stand the idea of going straight back to my basement studio in East Kesler. You ever have that feeling where you're tired but wired at the same time? Like your body wants sleep, but your head won't stop chewing on itself? That's where I was. So, I figured I'd take the Ridgeway Parkway just a drive to clear my head. It's a 2-lane road that cuts across the Blue Mountain foothills. And after dark, it feels like the rest of the world disappears. No traffic, no gas stations, no houses peeking through the trees. I didn't even put any music on, just rolled down the window a crack so I could hear the wind. It was around 11:30 when I hit that first big curve past mile marker 103. I glanced up at the sky. It looked like somebody had taken a thumb to the stars, smudging them around with just enough cloud cover to make them feel out of reach. There was this thin slice of moon, too pale to give off much light. The cold got into my sleeves before long. I kept shifting my grip on the steering wheel, trying to keep my hands from going numb. About half an hour in, I pulled off at this gravel turnout. I think it was near marker 118, but to be honest, I didn't look too closely. I'd stopped there. Once in June, when the grass was so thick with fireflies, you couldn't walk without brushing them off your legs. That night, though, there was nothing. No bugs, no breeze, just the engine ticking under the hood as it cooled. I turned off the headlights and let my eyes adjust. For a while, it felt almost peaceful sitting there in the dark, with the smell of cold dirt coming in through the cracked window. I tried telling myself that was why I was shivering. I must have sat there for 15, maybe 20 minutes, not really thinking about anything in particular. My brain had finally slowed down, and I started to think I'd head home after all. That's when I noticed a pair of taillights easing around the bend behind me. They were bright red, steady, but moving so slow it felt deliberate. At first, I figured it was just another driver being cautious, maybe someone who didn't know the road. But the car never me. Instead, the lights rolled up to about 20 yards behind my bumper and stopped. They stayed on, casting these long, uneven shadows across the gravel turnout. I remember sitting there with my hand hovering over the ignition. Part of me thought I should just start the car and go, but I couldn't shake the idea that whoever it was might need help, or that if I left, I'd spend the rest of the night worrying about it. I got out, boots crunching on the gravel, and called out, "Hey, everything okay back there?" Nothing. The lights didn't flicker or shift. I took a couple of cautious steps toward them, shading my eyes with my hand. That was when I realized something was off. There was no reflection on a bumper, no shine on a license plate, just two orbs of red hovering about 4 feet off the ground, unsupported by anything I could see. I know how that sounds, but I swear that's what it looked like. My scalp prickled all over, like the air itself had turned electric. Still, I kept moving. Maybe I thought if I got close enough, it would turn out to be a trick of the light, some weird reflection. I'd covered about half the distance when the lights just disappeared. No fade, no flicker, just gone. I stopped so fast I nearly slipped. My breath sounded huge in the silence. "Hello?" I tried again, a little louder this time. Still nothing. I turned back to my car, and that's when I noticed the passenger door was wide open. I knew I'd shut it. I'm the kind of person who checks things twice, sometimes 3 times before I leave them. But there it was, swinging open like it had been that way all along. The glove compartment was open too. Paper scattered across the seat and the floor mat like someone had been rummaging through them. For a second, I just stood there trying to convince myself it was a coincidence, like maybe I hadn't latched it all the way. But I could feel this hollow ache in my chest, like something heavy was pressing against my ribs. I climbed back inside. My hands were shaking enough that I fumbled the phone off the dash. When I picked it up, it was colder than the air, colder than anything else in the car. The screen was black, and no matter how hard I pressed the power button, it stayed that way. I set it on the passenger seat and tried to steady my breathing. That was when the taillights came back. This time, they were right behind me. I didn't even have to lean over to see them, just a curtain of red light glowing across the rear window. I turned in my seat and pressed my palm to the glass. My fingers looked pale and warped in the glow. There was still no shape behind them. No car, no person. Just those lights bright enough to turn my scattered papers into weird shifting shadows. I don't know how long I sat there trying to make sense of it. Long enough that my knuckles started to hurt from gripping the seat. I finally faced forward again and tried the ignition. The engine wheezed once, then fell silent. That was when I heard the footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming across the gravel behind my car. Crunch, pause, crunch. My throat felt so tight I couldn't swallow. I twisted the key again. Nothing. The footsteps stopped right behind my trunk. Something tapped the glass. A single sharp knock, then another. I couldn't look. I couldn't move. I just sat there, every muscle locked up, waiting for whatever it was to try the door. I turned the key a third time, and the engine finally coughed to life. I didn't even check the mirror. I threw it in reverse, feeling the tire spray gravel, then shifted into drive and slammed the gas pedal. I didn't look back. I drove for what felt like hours, never letting my speedometer dip below 70. The curves kept coming over and over, like the road had no intention of letting me off. When I finally hit the edge of Callahan, 20 minutes, maybe more, I didn't stop. When I reached the first gas station and pulled into the lot, my phone lit up by itself, like it had never been dead. I'd moved to Asheville for a job with a small publishing company. I wanted to live cheap, save up, clear my head. I found a cabin online, tiny one bedroom, no Wi-Fi, barely any cell signal, and it was 35 minutes from town. The photos were low resolution, but the rent was crazy cheap, and the view looked incredible, mountains rolling into forever. I took the chance, signed the lease without ever seeing the place. Looking back, that was the first mistake. It sat up a side road called Old Stone Path. The final 5 miles were gravel twisting through thick forest, not a single other house anywhere. It felt like I was driving into the middle of nowhere. I remember the engine sputtering once when I hit a patch of deep gravel under a thick canopy of trees. I thought, great, I'm really isolated here. But I brushed it off. I needed this quiet and cheap rent more than I needed reassurance. First day, I downsized what I brought. A mattress, a few sheets, a small kitchen set, and some books. No TV, no game consoles. It was silent. I spent hours getting settled, cooking pasta on a tiny stove, then reading by candlelight. That night, I dozed off early. No streetlights, just moonlight filtering through the curtains. Then came the knock. Second night, almost midnight, I was brushing my teeth, leaning over the sink, when I heard 2 soft knocks on the front door. They weren't aggressive, more like someone tapping to get attention. I stopped mid-brush, toothpaste still in my mouth, and stared. My heart kicked up a notch. There shouldn't have been anyone out there at that hour, not on a gravel road that nobody even lived on. I crept toward the door, gripping the wall frame. My phone was in the bedroom, too far away. I pressed my ear against the wood. Silence, except my own shallow breathing. I cracked it open just an inch. No one was there, but bare footprints were neatly leading to the door. Adult size, 5 toes, dirty arches, smudged heels. They stopped right at the threshold. No signs of retreat. I stepped out, listened. Only trees and gravel and moonlight. Then I locked up tight. Didn't sleep much. Morning brought damp wood. The porch was wet, maybe from an early rain. I shrugged it off as maybe a local kid pulling a prank. But then it got worse. Night 3. Slow, heavy steps pacing across the porch planks back and forth. I froze at the window and, when I opened, the door mid-step, it all stopped, as if someone had pressed pause. Night 4. I didn't sleep at all. I sat by the window in the dark, flashlight off, phone in hand. I needed eyes on the porch when the pacing started. That night, there was an additional sound. Chimes, gentle metallic notes. Tink, 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 tink coming from the woods. I didn't have chimes, didn't see any around. Just that soft, rhythmic disturbance from beyond the trees. Creepy, but quiet. Then it stopped. I scanned the woodline, saw nothing. So the next morning, I drove into town, picked up battery-powered motion sensor lights and a basic security camera. The guy at the checkout raised an eyebrow when I mentioned where I lived. He only said, "Old Stone Path. That's some freaky place." I didn't ask what he meant. Back at the cabin, I mounted the lights along the porch and driveway, set the camera facing the door. That night, I waited. I barely dozed. When I checked the feed in the morning, a 15-second gap appeared at exactly 2:17 a.m., filled with static, but the porch light had turned on during that gap. When the feed resumed, nothing was there. No figure, no animal. It felt too deliberate. Like someone with specific equipment could cause that. It fixed my focus on that exact time. Night 6, around 2:01 a.m., I was just starting to drift off when something slammed into the side of the cabin. A sharp crack, like someone punching the wall or worse. I hunched over, grabbed my knife from the nightstand, and turned on the flashlight. I crept down the hall, keeping the lights off, straining my ears. Outside, footsteps circled the cabin, slow and heavy, gravel crunching with each step. One step, then a pause, another step. They made a complete loop around the house. I carefully moved to the kitchen window, pressed my face to the glass. I saw something low to the ground, crawling between the trees. Its limbs jerked in unnatural, extended ways, like something dragging itself along. Then a whisper came from inside the cabin. I couldn't make out the words, but it was definitely coming from the hallway. My breath hitched. I bolted for the bedroom, slammed and barricaded the door shut using a dresser. At dawn, I cautiously walked around the exterior. On the porch, I discovered 6 piles of twigs. Each was arranged into a perfect triangle, all pointing towards the front door, like some kind of warning. I swept them away with my broom, discarding them. I didn't mention it to anyone. That afternoon, I drove into town and asked around about strange occurrences on Old Stone Path. The guy at the hardware store paused, looked me over, then quietly asked, "You mean near the dead end?" I nodded. He whispered, "Get out before the full moon." I left without buying anything else, unable to bring myself to purchase anything there. That night remained quiet. No pacing, no slams. Nothing happened until 3:08 a.m. I am. That's when I heard my name. Just the single word, Logan, whispered from somewhere inside the cabin. I was on the couch, gripping my knife, my heart pounding. I hadn't heard a door open or a window shatter. I followed the sound of my name into the hallway, and that's where I saw it. Nobody there. And then the light bulb flickered. For just a moment, I saw a long, distorted shadow stretch across the wall. Then, nothing remained. I sprinted back to the bedroom and didn't sleep again. 2 days later, I gathered all my belongings, left in the middle of the morning, and found a room in a shared apartment, sleeping for 2 straight nights, consuming cereal, watching television. Normalcy seemed to have returned. But I couldn't shake the feeling about my possessions left at the cabin. The camera, the knife, the twigs. On the 3rd day, I returned to retrieve my things, pulled up and noticed the door slightly ajar. Inside, every kitchen drawer was flung open. Silverware lay arranged in neat rows on the floor. Forks, spoons, knives, each spaced identically. I carefully stepped over them, raising my phone to record everything. My bedroom door was shut. I cracked it open. On the bed lay another pile of sticks, 7 triangles now forming a circle, and my knife, the very one from my nightstand, resting in the center. I froze, unable to move. I didn't touch anything. I just grabbed my bag and left. I drove straight to Asheville, found a roommate, situation, and made a point never to mention the cabin again. 3 weeks later, a text from the landlord arrived. "Did you leave something in the attic? There's some weird stuff up there." I'd never once set foot in the attic. I chose to ignore his message. 2 days after that, he sent a photo. It showed 7 triangles burned into the old attic floorboards, the exact same pattern, executed with the same eerie precision. He didn't ask any further questions. I didn't respond. I changed my phone number soon after. And I've never, ever driven down Old Stone Path again.